Okay.
C20, India 2023 envisions a conception of civil society 2.0 in a world where individual, family, society, market, and state can understand their respective roles better and supplement each other rather than engaging in conflicts. This year, the C20 symbolizes the flame of hope, self-motivation, and selfless service.
Amma is grateful to the Indian government for arranging such a high-quality meeting. All the issues raised here are vitally important. This should go beyond a mere physical meeting and become a true meeting, a meeting of hearts and minds. This is the only way to awaken ourselves and others.
This year, C20 working groups will focus on integrated holistic health, mind, body, and environment, sustainable and resilient communities, climate, environment, and net zero targets, education and digital transformation, gender equality and disability, technology, security, and transparency, lifestyle for environment, preservation and conservation of traditional arts, crafts, and culture, human rights as human values, revival of rivers and water management, seva, sense of service, philanthropy, and volunteerism. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family. Diversity, inclusion, and mutual respect. SDG 16 and promoting civic space. Delivering democracy through participatory governance.
When we study in college, striving to become a doctor, lawyer, or engineer, this is education for a living. On the other hand, education for life requires an understanding of the essential principles of spirituality. The real goal of education is not to create people who can understand only the language of machines. The main purpose of education should be to impart a culture of the heart, a culture based on enduring values.
Digital transformation is a bridge that can be used to instill awareness and strengthen the deep bonds students have between their nations, the world, fellow human beings, and nature. It is a tool that can be used to unify our relationships as a global family instead of creating a technological divide. Through these channels, we can help achieve the SDGs more effectively by connecting people, organizations, and resources that enable greater collaboration and impact. Digital education is an inclusive model that is for everyone. It can reach people in the most remote rural areas. It can be affordable for people who are economically disadvantaged. It can provide a means of communication for people with disabilities. The C20 Education and Digital Transformation Working Group will focus on inclusive education and accessibility, skill development, education for life, digital transformation, technology-enabled learning, and future of education. This working group also aims at addressing mental health awareness and solutions for substance abuse, with a specific focus on how this impacts today's youth and people from impoverished populations. By connecting through community-based programs, health and social awareness can empower and build resilience in people who have fallen into depression and addiction due to poor socioeconomic conditions. As the ultimate goal, they can return to confidence and dignity in their cultural diversity. Join our dialogues to ensure that education and digital technology are for a sustainable and equitable future. They are inclusive and accessible, regardless of background, location, or ability. C20 India 2023 envisions a conception of civil society 2.0 in a world where individual, family, society, market, and state can understand their respective roles better and supplement each other rather than engaging in conflicts. This year, the C20 symbolizes the flame of hope, self-motivation, and selfless service.
Is grateful to the Indian government for arranging such a high-quality meeting. All the issues raised here are vitally important. This should go beyond a mere physical meeting and become a true meeting, a meeting of hearts and minds. This is the only way to awaken ourselves and others.
This year, C20 working groups will focus on integrated holistic health, mind, body, and environment. Sustainable and resilient communities, climate, environment, and net zero targets. Education and digital transformation. Gender equality and disability. Technology, security, and transparency. Lifestyle for environment. Preservation and conservation of traditional arts, crafts, and culture. Human rights as human values. Revival of rivers and water management. Seva, sense of service, philanthropy, and volunteerism. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is one family. Diversity, inclusion, and mutual respect. SDG 16 and promoting civic space. Delivering democracy through participatory governance.
Amriteshwari Namaha. A warm welcome to all participants, and thank you very much for joining us today. I want to start by expressing our gratitude to our C20 chair, Amma, Her Holiness Sri Mata Amritanandamayi Devi, for making this event possible. I would like to extend my warm greetings and welcome all our participants to the second virtual seminar on education in emergencies. We will begin with a prayer to create an auspicious start to this event.
ध्यायामो धवलावगुण्ठनवती तेजोमयीं नैष्ठकीं स्निग्धां पाङ्गविलोकिनीं भगवतीं मन्दस्मितश्रीमुखीं वात्सल्यामृतवर्षिणी सुमधुरं सङ्कीर्तनालापिनी श्यामाङ्गीं मधुसिक्तसूक्तिम् अमृतानन्दात्मिकाम् ईश्वरी अमृतानन्दात्मिकाम् ईश्वरी अमृतानन्दात्मिकाम् ईश्वरी.
This virtual event, titled Policy Dialogue on Education in Emergencies, organized by the C20 Education and Digital Working Group, explores and touches upon how emergencies like conflicts, natural disasters, and pandemics disrupt education systems. These disruptions led to exclusion and exacerbate existing inequalities and discrimination, with potentially long-term consequences for future economic development. Adapting education to emergency context is crucial and involves creating safe learning environments, developing age-appropriate accessible learning materials, and employing educators trained to provide quality education in crisis situations. Innovative practices and approaches are also necessary. We are happy to work with each and every one of you. To be part of a subgroup of your choice, please sign up for a working group. We will share the link with you in our chat shortly. We also look for the best case studies, udaharans, from civil society organizations. Please share a suitable case study with us if you have one. The link will be posted on the chat. You can also submit it later on our C20 working group website. Live transcription has been enabled and is available to all participants. Once again, a warm and heartfelt welcome to each one of you. I now introduce Dr. Prema Nedungadi, coordinator of the working group on education and digital transformation. Dr. Prema is the director of Amrita Create, the Amrita Center for Research in Analytics, Technologies, and Education, and chair of the School of Computing at Amrita University. She has received the Digital India Award from the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology in the category of Digital Empowerment and the IT Excellence Award for E-Learning and Education from Computer Society of India. She was a finalist in the Barbara Bush Foundation Adult Literacy X Prize competition. She has over 100 research publications to her credit. I invite Dr. Prema Nedungadi to deliver the welcome address. Over to you, ma'am.
A warm and heartfelt welcome to each of you. We are privileged to welcome you to the event of this C20 India Working Group, focusing on two vital topics, education and digital transformation. Our agenda for today is to go over the C20 overview, look into education in emergencies, the topics, speakers, identify best practices. We will also have some poll questions, policy suggestions from both the speakers and from the audience. We want to understand key barriers and how they can be resolved. Our objective is to ensure that civil society voice and evidence-based practices related to both education and digital transformation are considered in G20 discussions and translated into the G20 leaders' declaration as policies. I'd like to quote Amma's words: "Education should spread light within and outside, instill awareness, and strengthen the deep bond between the student and his nation, the world, his fellow human beings and other creatures, nature, and God." Based on our research and deliberation so far, we have proposed the following sub-themes: education for life and global citizenship. Here, we look into the importance of value-based education, mind management education, education for persons with disabilities. This involves special education with the provision of specially designed instruction to meet the unique needs of students with disabilities, inclusive education, early identification, intervention. Then we look at learning equity and emerging technologies. Here we are looking to promote the use of technology-enhanced learning solutions that are tailored to the specific needs and circumstances of different countries, including underprivileged people, underdeveloped economies. Digital transformation. Here we are looking to promote and preserve culture, provide livelihood opportunities through digital technologies, address different types of health, e-governance services. Also, we are looking at open source solutions. Skill development. Here we acknowledge the dearth of skilled workers. We're also looking at technology, international accreditation for skills that could be promoted between G20 countries. And very important is the education in emergencies theme. To promote education in emergencies, prevent violence or address them, abuse, exploitation, create safe learning environments, developing age-appropriate accessible learning materials, and employing educators. Want to continue education during such emergencies. Our conferences and workshops, we've had a series of conferences and workshops. Now we are moving on to the northeast part of India, where we will be having one event in Mizoram and another in Manipur next week. We want to invite you to our large conference on May 20th and 21st. That is actually in Trivandrum, Kerala. And finally, let's look at education in emergencies. So far, we are looking at to ensure meaningful participation of the whole community, society, especially the youth, in the entire process of response and recovery. We want to ensure that educational curricula are robust enough. We have also looked at school in a box kind of environments, strengthen the capacities of teachers and educators and the entire community to be able to deal during emergencies, to put in place mechanisms to ensure a seamless transition of instruction, ensure assessments and mechanisms to ensure that no one is left behind. We will be hearing from a lot of experts today, much more about this. And finally, the objectives and modalities. So here, our goal is to take your advice, discuss on C20 policy recommendations, building on our preparatory work. And we will be looking for 2 sets of questions that will guide each moderated panel discussion. In what area would you advise C20 India to formulate policy recommendations? And would you have specific policy recommendations based on your experience or some best practice that you have seen? What are the key barriers to the implementation of these recommendations and how can these be resolved? We are looking for each panel to be concluded with important takeaways which will either validate our draft policy or perhaps add additional policy recommendations. Our request is for each panelist to please adhere to the time that you have been given so that everybody gets a chance to speak. And after that, the moderator will go over the moderated questions, and we would also take questions from the audience. Now I will introduce our moderator, Ms. Sel Shah. Sel has worked in computing, IT, and research for over 20 years, including in the Royal National Institute for the Blind, the Arts Council of England, and the European Organization for the Safety of Air Navigation in Brussels, before becoming a teacher for over 20 years. She has worked in state, independent, and also as an autism special school teacher. She has also worked in teacher training and developing contingency planning for continuity of service and education provision in emergency situations. She's also undertaking a PhD in sustainable development at Amrita University with a focus on education and inclusion. I welcome Sel to take over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prema, for the kind introduction. And thanks to all the speakers here today who have come. I will introduce each speaker before they provide their presentations. So I'm going to go straight in this evening, and I'd like to introduce the first 2 speakers together as they've provided us with a combined presentation. We have Ms. Shiva Kaur, who is the co-director at HeartMath Healthcare, architect and director of HeartMath's Heart Mastery. She's the program CEO of Heart Ambassadors, executive director of the FIERA Foundation, and the co-vice president and UN delegate for the UN Peace Messenger Organization, Pathways to Peace. She's a doctor of Oriental Medicine, master of HeartMath trainer, coach and author, and instructor for Amma's I Am meditation technique. She co-authored HeartMath's Stopping Emotional Eating program and study, and the Freedom with Pain program, available to all veterans of war. She's trained and mentored nurses, medical staff, and executives at medical centers, including the Mayo Clinic, Harvard, Stanford, Dartmouth, VA, Cedars Sinai, Kaiser Permanente, and more. She's also founded the first HeartMath Hospital Patient Education Program with Cleveland Clinic's Heart Brain Institute at North Hawaii Community Hospital. She's been a coach and advisor to the World Health Organization, members of the US military and Homeland Security, the United Nations, the Internal Federation of Civil Servants, cardiologists, heart-brain researchers, and physicists, and is published in journals such as Perspectives in Biology and Medicine and the UN Special. The FIRE Foundation, her nonprofit, has ECOSOC consultative status to the United Nations and partners with the Red Cross to deliver resilience training for staff and volunteers, and in disaster relief and international conflicts. She is featured as a love luminary in Marcy Shimoff's New York Times bestseller, Love for No Reason. She's also engaged in a 1-year collaborative with 3 times Nobel Peace Prize nominee Scilla Elworthy to bring her book, The Business Plan for Peace, to life through applied heart intelligence in online learning, and with UN, DSA, and UNITAR at the UN HLPF. Shiva speaks to people all over the world on how to access heart intelligence and inner peace in order to receive the benefit of the heart's impact on their relationships, health, performance, creativity, contribution, legacy, social change, and the building of a global culture of health and peace. She is to be joined by Ms. Linda M. McIntyre, who is the Chief Nurse of the American Red Cross. Linda McIntyre provides internal leadership for nursing and health professional volunteers, and provides oversight for academic service learning. Linda collaborates with senior leaders to provide vision, direction, and support for nursing and health in meeting the mission of the Red Cross. Linda is a heart master trainer and has a theology degree and a PhD in nursing from UCSF. And we're going to begin by showing a presentation which they have given us. Thank you.
Thank you for the privilege of consulting to the C20 and G20. I am Sheva Kaur, co-director of HeartMath Healthcare and president of the Fiera Foundation.
I'm Linda McIntyre, chief nurse of the American Red Cross.
And we're here to speak with you today about a best practice and some policy proposals related to the capacity to self-regulate quickly and efficiently our own physiology for increased self and situational awareness, improved cognitive function, solution seeking and problem solving, in this case today, specifically in emergency situations. For the purpose of addressing the challenges of coordinating effective communication, mitigating emotions of stress, and preventing and resolving post-trauma, all by way of introducing skills and science that empower youth and those around them in emergencies to maintain the very physiological capacity to learn and to teach and to adapt and to innovate. We're going to jump right in with the intervention and how it can be communicated efficiently digitally to large populations in the midst of emergency situations. So Linda, if you had to pick which one of these lines that you're looking at would look like the poise that we want in like an emergency?
Definitely the lower one with blue lines.
And which one of these lines looks like how we usually react or feel when we find ourselves suddenly in an emergency?
The top red jagged line.
Indeed. And what these are actually a picture of is heart rhythm patterns, or what we call heart rate variability, HRV. When the heart rhythm becomes incoherent, erratic, and chaotic, it produces systemic change in over 1,400 things in our physiology. And in a heartbeat, we can shift from that inner chaos to coherence with a simple intervention that's done with a breathing technique. We have to breathe anyway in an emergency, so we may as well breathe in a way that facilitates and fosters our coherence and cognitive effectiveness. And by the way, in how we collaborate with each other, so that getting crisis teams and emergency response teams working in synchronization happens more effectively with the use of this skill. This is all based on almost 30 years of peer-reviewed evidence-based research that you can find at heartmath.org. These techniques and interventions have been adopted widely around the world in a diverse set of industries. But we're going to speak specifically today about how they've been successful in emergency crisis situations and how that can be deployed digitally and applied through policy. Linda, would you like to talk us into one of HeartMath's techniques, this one called the quick coherence technique?
Sure. Focus your attention in the area of the heart. Imagine your breath is flowing in and out of your heart or chest area, breathing a little slower and deeper than usual. Inhale for 5 seconds, exhale 5 seconds, or whatever rhythm is comfortable.
And step 2.
Make a sincere attempt to experience a regenerative feeling, such as appreciation or care for someone or something in your life. Try to re-experience the feeling you have for someone you love, a pet, a special place, an accomplishment, or focus on a feeling of calm or ease.
As you breathe that feeling in through the heart and out through the heart, notice if there are any changes in your body, emotions, or thought process. This simple technique is like flipping a switch on our own operating system, so we enter a higher functioning state. Large populations, when applying these skills over time together, see dramatic improvements in mental and emotional well-being, in physical symptoms, in cognitive capacity. Again, they can be done in the heart and heat of the moment, which is why they work in emergency and crisis situations. Just one example of applying this in education, the US federal government implemented these skills in collaboration with the HeartMath Institute with high school students to improve test taking scores. In the spirit of the C20 and the increase we're looking to create globally in compassion and care, these simple interventions were found to create that in these high school students, reducing conflict and increasing positive feelings and empathy for others, which also improved test scores quite dramatically. Many of our human tests in this day and age are disaster and emergency related. If we look at a few of our successful case studies implementing these skills, starting with Nicaragua in their civil unrest in 2018. In that violent conflict, students in particular were targeted under government oppression. There were 2 murders outside of one of our schools, and we had to shut the school down. Several of my staff were in a flea market warehouse and surrounded by the guerrilla army, locked in, and sent me a WhatsApp here in this phone that they were about to light the building on fire. I myself, here in California, thousands of miles away, used this skill on that moment. What do I do? How do I help them? And I started communicating in WhatsApp, sending them the steps to that skill. And I got the message that after they applied that skill, they found a way out through the roof of the building and they survived. Then we used the skill together to explore how can we keep our children in school in the midst of this civil unrest, and came up with the idea to provide these children with backpacks with tablets and start a school in the cloud, where we continued to give them emotional self-regulation training alongside their reading, writing, arithmetic skills. HeartMath has an app to teach these skills, as well as a biofeedback technology that mirrors your heart rhythm in real time. So these can be deployed to large-scale populations at one time. That we don't need our external devices and digital communication to benefit from these interventions in emergencies, because the only technology we need is our own heart. So we've used these techniques in refugee camps and in border crossings where refugees are. In Nepal, we posted the quick coherence technique to mitigate the post-traumatic stress people were having after the earthquakes and aftershocks in new homes we were building for the Nepalese. We've applied this in the Australia floods and the Nicaragua hurricanes. I myself, when I was evacuated from our California wildfires, used the technique the moment I got the evacuation alert to calm myself down, identify what to pack up and which path to take to get away from the fire. Even while evacuating, because I had this technique on board, I was able to both be an evacuee and a first responder. And we recorded the technique in videos that were shown in evacuation shelters from the wildfires. So that has resulted in a long-term partnership with the Red Cross, training first responders. Linda, do you want to please speak to this?
Certainly. I'm deeply grateful for our collaboration. The techniques are easy to learn, they're easy to use, and enormously effective. I use them all day long. Many of the volunteers and employees who have used these have told me it's just changed the way they are. Some have decreased the need for medications. They've been enormously effective, not just for the responder, but that means for the people they're serving.
Thank you, Linda. As a result of these successes and many others, we proposed to the G20 to, number one, incorporate heart rate variability self-regulation tools as a fundamental part of curriculum in all schooling. Our second, in the larger pack, fifth policy proposal is that heart rate variability self-regulation training be provided to all first responders and emergency personnel. It's for more effective response and reductions in PTSD and secondary trauma.
We incorporate heart rate variability, self-regulation tools in all rapid response, emergency, and crisis notifications and communications, as well as education materials and evacuation warning messages for responders and citizens. This will decrease population stress, increase mental clarity, and mental, emotional, and physical resilience in times of crisis or disaster.
I can only imagine, as I got that evacuation warning on my phone, how powerful it would be to have a simple audio guidance saying, please focus your attention in the heart. Breathe calm and ease in through the heart and out through the heart as you proceed to your evacuation route. It can make such a difference, a life-saving difference in the case of my team in Nicaragua. Thank you for the privilege of presenting to you today. We are delighted to take your questions.
Thank you so much to Shiva, to you, and to you, Linda, as well, for that incredible video and technique that you've shared with us today. We're actually going to have an opportunity for questions and answers towards the end of the session. So what I'd like to suggest, unless you'd like to add another, just a quick message, Shiva and Linda, now, is that we ask the participants, our audience, to put questions in the chat so that they can be answered towards the latter part of the session today. So Shiva or Linda, would you like to say a quick word now? Otherwise, I'll move directly on to Jeffrey Golitz.
Thank you, Sal. Such a privilege to be here, and we're delighted to make the space for the other presenters.
That's very good of you. Thank you, Shiva. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next presenter, who, in fact, we have a party of three here, because the next speaker, Mr. Jeffrey Golitz, is currently the Director of Education with HeartMath Institute. He regularly consults with education professionals, mental health specialists, parents, and teens throughout the US, Mexico, and Canada to improve youth well-being, parent-child communication, and classroom climate and performance. He has co-created numerous educational curricula and programs designed to improve student resilience and well-being. So without any further ado, Jeffrey, please do go ahead and make your presentation. Thank you.
Hi, can I share my screen?
Please do, yes.
All right, looks like I can't share because the host.
Okay.
You have to disable, there we go.
Amal, can you give Jeff permission? Can you make him a co-host, please?
Yes,
There we go, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you see my screen now?
We can indeed, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the honor of speaking to this special group here. And I'll get right into it. We work with lots of kids, lots of schools across the globe, and we foster a lot of classroom readiness or learning readiness, what we call resilient learners. And it's so important these days because there's so much noise in the world. And so teaching basic resilience skills is now so important, almost like math and reading, because if you're not prepared to learn, if you're not ready to learn, then you're not going to be very successful and really be successful as a learner. And as we know, there's a lot of stress in the world, and so we address that in lots of schools across the globe. You have your typical hyperarousal state, which is fight or flight, a lot of trauma going on with that, and I'll be very brief here. And then you have the hypoarousal, where students are shut down, but we know that there's this optimal place in the middle where students can be more present and more engaged. And but there's a lot of trauma in the world. And in fact, one school district we're working with, they estimate that 40% of the students have some kind of trauma, some kind of adverse childhood experience. And I want to show you a graph of a research study we did with Ohio State here. It's really interesting. This is a 12-year-old female profiled with trauma. And if you look at the heart rate going up that vertical line, beats per minute, 42 to 140, this is 3 minutes of resting data. She's just been instructed to pretend she's waiting at a bus stop for 3 minutes, and her heart rate's going. She's in survival mode. There's no way she can learn if her heart rate is going that fast, if there's this emergency fight or flight in her brain like that. So part of what we do is we teach kids self-regulation skills, either with technology or without technology. And you can see here's another middle school student, and we did a lot of pre and post here in our measurements in the study. This is 3 minutes of data on the left side, the pre. It's not a bad heart rhythm, but it's somewhat chaotic. But after learning self-regulation skills, you can see that the wave on the post panel there is much more organized. And that's a baseline after 10, 20-minute sessions over a couple months, just learning some basic self-regulation skills and applying it. And we're doing this in many environments. And in particular, we work with a UN camp, Camp Sharia in northern Iraq, with a group of Yazidis who, as you know, were almost exterminated or attempted to be exterminated by ISIS. And this is a trainer, a teacher, educator that we train. And you could see on that little grease board, that whiteboard here, he's teaching heart math, and he's teaching the ANS, the autonomic nervous system, to these teens. Many of them have been exposed to just some extraordinary atrocities. And so we taught these students through this teacher multiple sessions of self-regulation and trauma. Likewise, here's some students in Tehran who, before they read the Quran, they're practicing quick coherence, the very technique that Linda McIntyre taught us here. And they do that as part of learner readiness. We have also upcoming projects in Chile, where we're working with some nonprofits there, some of the poorest schools in Santiago, Chile, where we're going to do a research study teaching these students basic self-regulation. These are upper elementary kids. Likewise, there's another project emerging in Nicaragua, rural Nicaragua, where we're going to empower women who find employment difficult to get. We're going to be using some of our strategies in a classroom there. So there's lots of neat projects that are going on, whether it's in a regular public school, whether it's in the youth agency, whether it's working in refugee camps. The idea here is to kind of diminish that stress response, that trauma response, and evoke the heart of children to be more present in their learning, in addition to the work we do with many first responders around the globe to help them be more present and to reduce that secondary trauma I have. So that's my really short presentation today. I want to keep it simple, but I'm so glad to be part of you. And this is such an important initiative in a time of epic change. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. That was fascinating, and we could have definitely heard more from you. It was really interesting to hear about the work you're doing on self-regulation skills. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to now move on, and we've got some polls for people to do, so that we take the policy recommendations, which came from Linda and Shiva, and give the audience a chance to vote on them and rank them. I'm just going to give some instructions out about how to use the polling software that we're going to use. We'll initiate it from this end over here. And the first thing you'll need to do is click on open. You'll be asked to vote. And then the step 3 is you make your choice to submit. So those are the key things to look for, those blue buttons. If we could go to the next slide, please. What some of you might find is that you don't get the bar which comes up on the right-hand side of the screen. And that's because you need to go to the top of your screen in Zoom where it says view options and make sure that you exit full screen. So you might want to do that now before we initiate the poll software. So if you go to the top of your screen to view options and exit full screen, there is an easier way even than this, because if you are using a computer and you have your mobile phone free, all you need to do is scan the QR code that's going to come up on the screen and you'll have access to all the polls. So we're just going to initiate that now. And be ready to click open. That should be coming up on your screen now. Okay, so we can share these details with all the speakers as well later. We're going to move on to the next speaker. So our next speaker is Ms. Venti Sandal-Asen. Venti has acquired knowledge from more than 20 years of experiences and of responsibility in developing methodological educational training materials, contextualizing and institutionalizing the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, the INEE, minimum standards in collaboration with authorities, UN agencies, and NGOs and INGOs in countries that are in war and conflict, Sri Lanka, Iraq, DRC, and MENA. She was the coordinator of the UN Education Cluster in Myanmar, Gaza, Pakistan, Philippines. Capacity development building and training of educational staff from ministry to field level, including cross-sectional training where health, nutrition, water, and sanitation and protection. She's worked in Ukraine, Senegal, Afghanistan, Malawi, Kenya, DRC, Uganda, Tanzania, Nepal, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Philippines, India, Bangladesh, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, Indonesia, India, Thailand, Ecuador, Peru, St. Martin, and South Korea. It's an incredible list of countries to have worked in. Over the past 3 years, throughout the corona pandemic, more than 50 INEE MS trainings and orientations have been developed and conducted for individuals, organizations, universities, and coordination mechanisms worldwide. We're very happy and very fortunate to have you presenting with us this evening. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It would be great if I could share screen because I have a couple of slides I would like to show you all. Let me see. Am I then going to the... to share screen here, just a moment. Yes.
That's perfect. We can see it. Yeah.
You can see it, yeah. I wish, first of all, I would say thank you for inviting me to this very important event. And I would like to say a little bit about the Interagency Network for Education in Emergency. It's a network that should be neutral, and it's open for everyone to become a member. We have 20,000 plus individual members all over the world, and they are based in 190 countries. In addition to that, we have more than 4,000 organizations, universities, ministries, countries itself that are members. And it's important to say that INE exists for and because of the members. So it's neutral and it's member-driven. Our mission is to ensure the right to quality, safe, relevant education for all who live in emergency and crisis contexts through prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. So to all of you, please become a member if you really like what you are hearing and seeing. We need you all on board. First of all, I would like to say that I'm so glad the three first panelists are talking about the importance of the human being and who we are in a crisis situation. That said, the difference between education development and education in emergency, it is three very clear things. It's the physical, psychological, and cognitive development. And it's important in a crisis situation to try to turn the situation from development to the emergency. Normally, in development situation, a teacher will focus on the subject. And we very often say that subject maybe in a normal situation should be 95%, but the psychological part need to be there. So we say 5%, as you can see on top of this drawing. In a crisis situation, we very often say, turn it around and try to be, to look at 95% well-being and 5% subject. And this, of course, is all in line with what kind of funding mechanism do we have in an emergency situation. Because if you are well funded, the crisis you are responding to are well funded, you can move back to normalcy quite quickly. But if not, you will be in a crisis situation for a long time. And as we know, the media and the big picture do not have time to look at more than one crisis at a time. And we saw what happened during when Ukraine was occupied, that Syria was forgotten about, for example, and think about all the other small emergency going on worldwide that we don't hear about, but the crisis is there all over the globe. So what I would like to say a little bit more about it is, what is the value of using a common framework when preparing and responding to education during a crisis? It is important to have a common framework for organizations, for UN agencies, for ministries in a country, so we can move ahead together. Because in a crisis, resources and capacity are very stretched. And it's important that we move ahead in one direction together. INE, the interagency network, we have developed minimum standards that you easily can use as a framework. That doesn't mean that you need to have a common strategy with everyone, but you can develop your strategy based on the minimum standard. And in addition to that, you can merge the minimum standard with your own standard in the country you work in. In addition to that, it is important to be coordinated. So if you have a coordinated mechanism in place, it's very important that Minister of Education, that is the owner of the education system and is accountable for it, is part of that coordination mechanism. Having a common framework, you also can ensure quality and you can lift the human rights. And that is important also to moving ahead. I have another question, and that is, why is it imperative to commit to a rigorous contextualization process in the absence of developing from bottom up? Talking about bottom up, top down is about what is going on in the field and what is going on the top. Minister of Education, owner of this education system, and also accountable for the education system, need to be connected to the bottom. I said, use common framework, but to use a global framework will not help, because the framework developed globally need to be contextualized. So you have to move from global to local to include whoever you have in your system at all the education levels, to move on with a contextualization process, so you really understand what's going on the field level in your context, and then you can move upwards and have this in a really common way forward. And this said, it is to take into consideration that the minimum standard that we have developed, it's actually for education in general, because you always have to start with what's already in place in a country of origin. You have to take what's there and then develop the framework that suit your context. So important that everyone in each level are part of a contextualization process of the framework you would like to have. That said, how do we build a focus on financing when creating contingencies and preparing for crisis? Very often, national authorities are responsible for providing education, as I said. And all that includes coordination and providing sufficient financial, material, and human resources. And you need to take into consideration that when you plan for a crisis, you have to develop contingency plans that should sit with government. So all organizations in a country are able to prepare and respond to that contingency plan. And a contingency plan might be for a country that very often see that a contingency plan is kind of a weather forecast. If you know that a natural hazard will come up, you have to plan for the education system in a natural hazard. If you know that the election coming up next year or so on, then you have to plan for if a crisis can happen during an election. And that is costly, but you need to have that in the financial education plan, because then you will also be linked to all the organizations that are in place in your country. And that means that all levels will respect each other. You will be able to work through a coordination mechanism, and you will take the ownership and be accountable for the education system, including the financial part of it. But that said, it's important to go back and say that education in emergency, it's not a new program. It is education as such. That is education development that's ongoing in your country. But in crisis, you have to focus on physical, psychological, and cognitive development of all students and teachers in the school system. I think I stop there. So thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you so much for that very strategic approach to education emergencies. We do have a poll that we can do. It's a very simple one because your points were very simple. So I'll just implement those for people to try out. Excuse me. We're going to move to the next one.
Sorry for my movement.
We're going to move on to the next speaker so that we have plenty of time for discussion. So our next speaker is Ms. Emmanuelle Dobelaere. Emmanuelle Dobelaere is a clinical psychologist, counselor, trainer, and postdoctoral researcher at the University of Paris, France. She specializes in psychotrauma treatment and more precisely in EMDR. She leads Psyche, an NGO that promotes practices, training, and research linked to trauma treatments. So Ms. Emmanuelle, please do proceed. Thank you. Do you have a presentation to share?
Sure, thank you for your invitation. I'm really honored to be part of this working group, and I'm going to share my screen now. Sorry, it takes a little time. So here it is. Oh, excuse me. There is. So before considering going back to school, sorry, I have all your apps on my screen. So here it is. I would advise that in case of emergencies, we should address traumas first, if they have some, because
can I just interrupt you? So I'm just going to interrupt you for 1 minute. Are you able to put it in presentation mode?
Yes, but there are so many activated screens. No, that is not. Oh.
There. Yeah.
Here it is.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Perfect.
Then, in case of emergencies, before considering sending children and teens back to school, their psychotraumas need to be addressed first, if they have some, because psychotrauma symptoms can prevent them from focusing their attention on the teachings at school. Psychological trauma is an emotional response to a traumatic event or series of events, a damage or injury to the psyche after an extremely frightening or distressing event. And this event may involve witnessing someone's actual death or personally experiencing a threat to physical or psychological integrity, serious physical injury, assault, rape, and sexual abuse, being held as a hostage. If not treated, psychotrauma can lead to a post-traumatic stress syndrome or stress disorder, PTSD, PTSD being a mental disorder. And PTSD is mainly based on 3 categories of symptoms lasting for at least 1 month following a traumatic event. Revivals, avoidance, and stress. Revivals are recurrent, involuntary, and intrusive distressing memories of the traumatic event, nightmares, and flashbacks. Avoidance, victims of PTSD avoid cues that are suggestive of the traumatic experience, thoughts, feelings, places, people, activities, and so on, that may remind them of the event. Finally, threats. People with PTSD have a persistent, people with PTSD have a persistent perception of a current threat, hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response, difficulty concentrating, and irritability. Regarding psychotraumas, I would like to highlight 3 challenges. The first is that while trauma is a major health issue, it is underdiagnosed and undertreated. The second challenge is that trauma is associated with an increased risk of suicide, especially in children and teens. And the third challenge is that psychological trauma, especially in childhood, is a risk factor for the development of future mental disorders. I'm sorry, I just cannot move this bar downside and I cannot read perfectly my slides, but I hope I'm clear enough.
Very clear.
Thank you. So regarding the first challenge, as you know today, trauma is a major health issue. It is likely to occur in many emergency situations. And the United Nations Chief Secretary General Antonio Guterres said in March 2022 that 1/4 of humanity, 2 billion people, are living in conflict areas. Millions of people worldwide are either refugees or internally displaced people, and displacement itself is a big risk factor for trauma. For instance, 281 million people are international migrants. I won't detail all the data. Here are other traumatic situations. I will mention that 1 in every 3 women worldwide actually suffers during their lifetime from sexual, physical, or emotional abuse, and that COVID itself was a source of traumatic stress. Most of these traumas are called big T traumas because they are the results of extreme events of loud emergency, but there are also the small T traumas caused by life adverse events, everyday traumatizing events like accidents, bullying, child abuse, divorces. These are silent emergencies, but they affect literally millions and millions of people. Psychotrauma is then a major mental health, but it is underdiagnosed and undertreated because there is no access to mental health services or to health services, especially in rural communities. Most people with PTSD do not access to evidence-based treatments, and this situation is much more worse in low and middle income countries. Though there are treatments for psychotraumas and PTSD, CBT and EMDR being the 2 treatments recommended by the World Health Organization, and very often they are not accessible because of the limited number of psychologists and psychiatrists, and because of the cost of the training and certifications, and very often they are not available everywhere in the world. The second challenge is that psychotrauma is associated with a high risk of suicide, especially in children and teens. For instance, in the US, suicide is the second leading cause of death among children 10 to 14 and among teens between 15 and 19, and the leading cause of death for 14 to 15 years old. The third challenge is that psychological trauma, especially in childhood, is a risk factor for later mental disorders. There is strong suggestive evidence for an association between psychological trauma and any mental disorder. Regarding all these challenges, here are my recommendations. First, training communities. Second, the creation or reinforcement of trauma-informed mental health services. Third, prevention of adverse childhood experiences and psychotraumas. The first recommendation is training communities. It is important to train communities, for instance, rural communities, workplaces, army, prisons, and not only health professionals, doctors, nurses, counselors, to recognize trauma symptoms, to treat trauma, and to use mental health first aid. Two studies were made and they demonstrated that trauma treatment training for paraprofessionals where there is no access to traditional healers, no mental health service, were really efficient. So these paraprofessionals were able to treat traumas without being doctors, nor psychologists, nor psychiatrists. It was done in East Africa, and then the paraprofessionals could treat traumatic stress, and it was done either in Iraq, I don't know how it is pronounced in English, in Iraq, so it was used to treat PTSD. They were taught to treat PTSD with CBT and NDR approaches. One of my colleagues and partners of Psyche trained some French army soldiers in mental health first aid, which can be really helpful during wars. Furthermore, COVID taught us that online trainings in trauma treatment can be efficiently provided, so it can be accessible in mainly worldwide. My second recommendation is the creation or reinforcement of trauma-informed mental health services and special units or support system that can deal with traumas linked to emergencies. The first example is the example of the French CUMS. CUMS are medical and psychological emergency units. And in the first 24 hours of a traumatic event, psychiatrists, psychologists, and nurses of CUMS specifically trained and integrated into an emergency medical unit, ensure immediate and post-immediate support and post-immediate care to prevent the development of post-traumatic stress disorder. And this early intervention is really important to prevent the development of post-traumatic stress disorder. The CUMS professionals are available at the site of the event, in healthcare facilities and at reception centers for families and those involved. And CUMS are present in every French administrative department and can be reached through 2 hotlines.
Can you start to wrap up? Can you start to wrap up, please? Because you've gone over into 8 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. NGOs could provide trauma treatments as well. Psyche did during COVID, and there are evidence and studies about it for providing trauma treatment online for a group of students, of teens. And my last recommendation would be the prevention of adverse childhood experiences and psychotraumas through education in communities, schools, and family, through policies, and through the development of teams of interdisciplinary professionals committed to supporting children who have been traumatized, members of the school safety, mental health team, and so on. And last point would be the empowerment of children, teaching them how to deal with their emotions, for instance, or giving them information about health. Thank you for your attention. Can you hear me?
Yes, and thank you so much. Sorry for rushing you at the end because it's so critical and so important, everything that you have to tell us.
No problem.
We have
I
another
prefer-
speaker following you and then some discussion to come on. Thank you so much for your presentation. So our
Very
next,
well.
I'm going to move on to our next speaker. We can do the polls at the end if we have time, because our next speaker is Sri Mintu Debnath, the Senior Manager of Save the Children. He's a humanitarian professional with 20 years of experience, including 7 years in government. His association with the sector is mainly planning, designing, implementing, and monitoring of large-scale disaster risk reduction, school safety, education and emergency, EIE, programs, and humanitarian response in India and neighboring countries. He's worked across a range of social and cultural environments with different organizations, from grassroots organizations to international organizations. Whilst working with NGOs, he was part of several emergency responses since 2000 across the country and Southeast Asia. Please welcome, I'd like to welcome you. Thank you so much, sir. Please go ahead and start your.
Thank you very much. Apology, I don't have a presentation, but I'll bring the reflection from the ground. All my previous speaker set the context that in any disaster and emergency, it's create a helplessness condition, and children are the most vulnerable and impacted. We all know that. Now, education and its institution is actually everything for children. If you see that, the education and the education institute is the place. It's create the motivation. It's give the learning opportunity to the children. It's provide the opportunity for children to participate and to understand the world at their own way. Now, any emergency context is exactly the opposite situation, where all of these are not ups and downs. Now, in any emergency, we have seen that education is the first service to suspend and last service to restore. Across the globe, if you see, anything happen, the education is the first things to stop and the last things to restore. That's the most critical context for children. Now, ensuring learning continuity is the most important for us, because ensuring learning continuity for children is important, because it's related to their rights, and ensuring zero death and 0 days loss in education is actually everyone's priority, and it's completely related with the children's right. Recently, in India, the Odisha flood response, what we have seen is that we met children during that crisis situation, and what the children are asking is that, very simple things. What they're saying that is that they need a staircase, so that they ensure that the ground floor is underwater, but the first floor is accessible, so that children can access the first floor. They are asking that if boat can be provided, so that we ensure their safe mobility to access the education. Now, how important it is? How important is that children are so eager that their learning should not be stopped in any circumstances like that. Here in Save the Children, education in emergency is the top priority for any humanitarian response across the globe. One of the major intervention what Save the Children do is that set up a child-friendly space. In any emergency circumstances, it's important that to create a safe space for children, so that we ensure their learning continuity are ensured. They come together, their learning continuity are ensured in emergency, which also provide kind of a psychosocial support to them. So temporary learning center in a makeshift space in any humanitarian crisis, one of the key intervention what Save the Children do across the world. Also, ensuring psychosocial support and their mental well-being, especially on the socio-emotional learning, is another important intervention. We as a Save the Children, Save the Children work across the teacher, children, parents, working on the curriculum, working on the life-saving skills, pertaining to the children. That's how the intervention is so important on ground. My clear recommendation to the forum is that every school should have a school safety plan, and it's regularly implemented. It is so important that every individual school or individual education institute have a school safety plan which link to home to school and home to school approach, because only institution safety is not adequate. It has to be linked with the coming from the home to school and going back to home. The entire ecosystem has to be safe, and during, especially in the crisis context. The third important thing is that the education curriculum, the curriculum where children learn every day should be also focus on life-saving skills, resilience learning, and risk-informed learning. These are so important that the children should learn in their day-to-day life. The third important is that the education, all national and local government should prepare an education roadmap for the country and for the region, so that it ensure that there is a clear education roadmap. Because what we have seen is that securing education in emergency as a space in any humanitarian response is very less, because it compared to any other sector, either health or livelihood or any other sector, and the education in emergency comes at the very later stage, but which is actually not. Education in emergency, we all see, is a life-saving support. The last important is that all the national and local government to plan and implement the preparedness activity, preparedness on the comprehensive school safety, preparedness as a violence-free school, and preparedness as a school of zone of safe. These are clear, important recommendation from my side. And lastly, enhancing the financing on the education in emergency is one of the important. Thank you very much. I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you so much for raising those important points, particularly that every school should have an emergency plan. I'm going to now implement the polls for Emmanuel's and Shimintu's presentations, and then we're going to start to move on to the discussion. So bear with me. I think we'd like to really carry on and move on to discussions. I'll just do a quick summary of the presentation so far, just to refresh people's minds. We heard from Shiva and Linda about the HeartMath app, and we're able to experience the actual one of the exercises as well. Jeff talked about classroom readiness and resilience skills and basic self-regulation skills, which are so important, and learner readiness. I think the tool that we learned was called quick coherence as well. We also heard from Bente as well. She told us and advised us all to become members of INEE. I'm sure I'm going to do that this evening after the event. She talked about the 3 levels of sort of physical, psychological, and the cognitive education, and this move from development to emergency, so that in a normal situation, the subject takes 95% and the psychological side takes 5%, but in a crisis, it's reversed and 95% becomes the well-being. She talked about funding, and that was echoed in a later talk as well by Sri Mintu, that we need to really think about funding, about a common framework, that we have to have a minimum standard that people can build on and contextualize as well. And she talked about planning for disaster and crisis in terms of financial planning as well, which is so important. Emmanuel talked about trauma, which Jeff also talked about as well in his talk, and she specifically talked about PTSD and about how that expresses itself for people in terms of revivals, avoidance, and threats, how it's underdiagnosed and undertreated, and in many cases can, it's one of the causes for suicide as well. She talked about 2 billion people in conflict areas. So the numbers are very big, they're very vast. And we had concluded the talks with Sri Mintu, talking about creating safe spaces for children and how important it is in a crisis situation, to set up the learning centers, because it plays such a strong role in the psychosocial support for the children as well. He talked about school safety plans, which I absolutely agree with, and also about children learning life-saving skills and about risk-informed learning as well. There was much more in the presentations this evening. I can't cover it all in the summary, but I'd like to move on to the panel discussion. So we have a specific question which I'd like to put to each of the members of the panel, which is that you've given us some amazing policy recommendations. Are there any challenges for education and emergency that you don't think have been covered in this evening's presentations? And I think a really important question is, what are the what would be the barriers to implementing your policy recommendations, and how do you think these can be resolved? So we can have volunteers, or we can do it in the order of speakers, whatever everyone prefers. If anybody would like to volunteer to start. So yeah, what are the barriers to implementing your policy recommendations that you foresee?
Thank you so much, Shell, and thank you to all the speakers. It's extraordinary to see, actually, and enlightening how in sync we all are on the importance of the well-being of the child and also the well-being of the teachers and, excuse me, the adults surrounding. Sorry, one moment. Surrounding that educational experience for the child and also just their development. So I would say one of the greatest barriers is human stress overall, because with an adult population stressed to the max, not even in emergency situations, and then pushed past the edge in a crisis or emergency, when the adults are in survival mode, then the basic fundamental developmental needs of the children they're responsible for can often go overlooked and neglected. And so really, this goes back to cliches from my point of view: an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. if we are to integrate in existing curricula and social education structures all of these trauma-informed interventions that have been spoken about today and care about the human being and their skills for life, not just skills for making a living, then we have a better prepared society of adults that are more equipped to handle emergencies themselves and continue the developmental needs and care for children in the midst of those emergencies. So this is a dramatic change in prioritization of our society that is focused on quality of life of human beings and all life itself as the foundational outcome of education, rather than just the ability to be workers in the global workforce driving GDPs. So I think it's a prioritization change at the foundational level of what our education is about and for.
Thank you so much, Shiva. Thank you. Please, audience, please, put questions in the chat, and you can add your responses to these questions and make policy recommendations as well in the chat as our speakers are talking. Jeff, would you like to add to anything Shiva has said?
Yes, thank you. I agree with Sheva, the prioritization, but when the world is in survival and even the policymakers are struggling, they're kind of in a survival mode of just trying to maintain their political status, let alone budgetary. The missing element to me is just, and I've seen, is neuroscience and the understanding of the heart-brain connection, and actually was talked about earlier, just the impact of trauma on children's bodies and their brains. And as we've seen in the United States, but also internationally more and more, is that knowledge increases in neuroscience. So it's really an education aspect of it. Then the policymakers are more open to these new policies, these new implementations, and actually ready to even finance it in many cases, because learning scores are kind of remaining flat and they're not moving forward. The engagement of learners, the disengagement of learners can be widespread. So I think the education and neuroscience can help shape policy in ways that not just the politics of decision-making can make an impact, especially when there's crisis. Policymakers listen to more when there's crises, certainly at the local and regional levels. So neuroscience plays a real important piece there.
Thank you. Bente, would you like to add something?
I think the most challenging and barrier is that working in silos. The entire disaster risk reduction, ministry and others working in their way, then the education ministry is working in their way. So coming together and having one common national roadmap, which includes education in emergency and all other sector, is the biggest challenge. So that's breaking that silos and barriers and coming together and equally giving importance education in emergency in the policy making, in the national planning is, I think, the most important. The second part is that looking the world into children's eyes. We all adults are thinking about their policy, their education. Involvement of children in the policy making, their participation, asking and understanding from them what exactly they want and they look like. I think that's the one of the biggest solution. I think across the world, this platform, on such platform like this, gives more opportunity to young people and the children to share their thought, how they look like the education emergency, how they want to create their education space safe. I think that's the way forward we need to think. Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Mintu,
you. And that could be applied to.
I want to super briefly celebrate what Mintu just said. And we actually have a youth delegate present in India right now for the meetings from Montreal. She's 17, but giving these spaces, inviting children and youth and adolescents into the policy dialogue is an exquisite best practice.
Thank you. Yes, I think we can take that on board for all the themes, not just education and emergency. Yes. Thank you. Bente, would you like to say something before Emmanuel?
Yeah, yes, thank you very much. And thank you to all the other panelists. If this is a barrier, to me, yes, what I'm coming up with, and but it's always challenging. And that is in all crises happening, especially in the South, a lot of expats are brought into the countries. And that can be a big barrier because we are coming with my skin very often, bringing a totally different culture into the context. And it's something about the cultural sensitivity to understand and respect it. I might not never understand it, but the respect it should be on top of it. And then it's about the religion. We are coming in with different beliefs. And very often we are looked at because of the skin, because of where we come from. Money is part of it. In addition to that, we have the political system that is very often totally different from our own. And I have experienced working in so many countries that very often Minister of Education are not used to or do not talk directly with the field level. And it's difficult for the field level people to talk to the government. So to make a safe space for people in the field is very, very important. And that said, bringing with us, going into the authorities, authority that is Ministry of Education, I can bring with me a lot of issues that I am expert on in my country or my context, but 2 ears and 1 mouth. Kind of remembering that I am always a guest. I only have to support, and I have not been through the trauma. I think that is so important to remember. In addition to that, I would like to comment on Mintu regarding the roadmap. Yes, I can't agree more on that. And that is actually what I brought up regarding contingency planning by government in your own context. That is the roadmap. But we have to make the ministry accountable for all education system. And we have, at some point, they are the owner, and then they have to be accountable. But it's the field level that knows what is going on. So based on context and move on. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Bente. And it's interesting to see we're having this approach of the inner child, and then also the actual physical services that they need, and the actual infrastructure that they need, as well as the inner child. Speaking of which, Emmanuel, would you like to comment about some of the barriers that you see in terms of implementing your policy recommendation?
I do agree with what was said before. I would emphasize the fact that we have to be very aware of people's resources, because very often they have resources. Sometimes in case of emergency, they forget that they have the resources, and our role as care providers is to help them to be in touch with their resources, even cultural resources, and especially very ancient knowledge of healings. So in some countries in Africa and India, there are very established and powerful ways to heal, but sometimes they don't have access to it. But I feel that one of our first action would be to help them to be in touch with this. That's it. Thank you.
No, thank you. And it continues on from one of the policy discussion meetings we had earlier on this week on Indigenous knowledge and education as well. We have some questions from the audience and some comments as well. So I'm just trying to work through them so that I can give them to you. Linda, are you still there? Would you like to, you haven't had a chance to speak. Would you like to contribute to this discussion as well?
Thank you for the opportunity to participate. I deeply value the discussion and the goal to really connect us all together. We are truly connected. And I think that, to Sheba's point earlier, prevention is so important and underrated. And I think addressing that prevention in all levels is key to going forward. It really does make a tremendous difference, and also focusing on where there are strengths rather than gaps. So even, again, I'm not a child psychologist, but I know in working with children, I've been a social worker, we can focus on the gaps, we can focus on the pathology, but I think truly I've seen a lot of help for individuals after disasters and other traumatic events is helping them recognize their strengths. So in addition to what we're doing to support the trauma, helping recognize the strengths that are within is some of the most powerful work we can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Jeff, you have your hand raised. Did you want to add something?
Yes, these are really, really good points involving the locals, the people that are actually part of the living environment, rather, as Benza said, outsiders coming in, different religions. And I want to address that kind of like a fundamental point. It's almost like the elephant in the room. I've been part of many meetings, as we all have, and you have these beautiful mission statements or value statements that everybody subscribes to. And then these are the policymakers, and they want to implement it in the local communities, but they can't get along. Their egos got in the way. They're fighting over budgets, they're fighting over policies, and that becomes what they're modeling. So here we're trying to bring everyone together and do something good, but all this backroom infighting in politics, and that to me is there's a level of incoherence that happens at a leadership level that I've seen so many times, and I'm wondering, where are the adults in the room? Why are these adults behaving like children? And they're not modeling self-regulation or civility in their discussions, and getting into yelling and finger pointing. So at that most basic level, I think we as adults need to grow up a little more before we can expect to do these beautiful policies if we can't get along at some level.
Thank you. I know, Mintu, you have a question, but we had a question from somebody that sort of is in keeping with what you were just talking about. He said, how can this discussion, it's from David Wick from Pathways to Peace. And he said, how can this discussion and collaboration be carried on beyond this presentation? So I think that's something to think about, you know, based on what you just said as well, Jeff. But I know that Mintu, you wanted to add to the discussion as well.
I mean, I just want to add, often we forget that Education Institute is a social institute. And we often forget that community-based solution, community-driven education in emergency. We talk about a larger policy, but the closest institute in the community is the school, which actually managed by the community. So I think in the policy somewhere, a community-based education in emergency preparedness at the very community level should be focused. Otherwise, from outside, it is going to be difficult to solve the problem. It's within the community, the institute is in the community. So my focus is on a community-based preparedness on education emergency should be in the policy. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just reading one of the comments. I think it's somebody who has been using HeartMath, perhaps. It says, I love including the children in the school program I have participated in. The children themselves have taught their friends and family the social emotional tool we learned today, quick coherence. with the experience of understanding of the basic neuroscience that helps them understand their own physiology and reactivity. It has been so empowering for them. So I'd like to open to see if anybody would like to add any more questions. We had a question saying, is it possible to have a policy for free education in India from playgroup to PhD students, which could be more global, couldn't it, in terms of doesn't everybody have the right to education, and shouldn't it be independent of caste, community, rich or poor, for everyone as well? So that was one suggestion, not so much on the theme of emergency, but on the theme of equity. Yeah. So does anybody want to add more to the discussion about the barriers? Does anybody like to make a suggestion on perhaps a way forward after this event in terms of how people could be working together to collaborate?
I would love to jump in briefly, Sal, and just say, first of all, I'm so thrilled to be a part of this dialogue and nourished deeply by all the speakers. Thank you for your input and the audience input. And say, in terms of the barriers, if I were to summarize, cultural sensitivity, also ubiquitous access, as the last audience member just submitted in the chat. And as Jeff mentioned, just, playing well with others for the adults in the room, if you will. And it's one of the reasons that, having been exposed to a vast array of interventions, that I have dedicated my life to bringing HeartMath interventions forward at the policy level. Because, and I would add to those three, cost involved, and the prioritization, not just in terms of focus of life skills, but also the investment of the G20 countries in education as a priority, and the investment culturally in education as a priority. And what I mean by that is not just that, for example, the US spends 50% of our budget on military and 3% on education. If we were to spend more of our resources educating people than killing people, that would be a type of prevention. So to me, the investment of resources is a barrier, but also the investment of perception of value on education, where if you look at social media, for example, where sports heroes and rock stars are the ones that are admired, and teachers are looked at as kind of a necessary evil by certain populations of children. But that's a cultural imprinting we've created. We create the impression of who the heroes are, and we can heroize our teachers and heroize education. We had a program in Nicaragua for a while called School is Cool. Those things are prevention. If you look at Jeff's presentation, where resilience was the capacity to prepare for, recover from, and adapt in the face of challenge, adversity, or stress. Recover and adapt is sort of the last of our worries, if we can focus on prepare. And I learned this from Linda and the Red Cross and our work there, because I called Linda in a disaster cycle service that was affecting my local community and said, let's go out and help. I have a team of volunteers ready. And she laughed and she said, well, we need to put them through background checks if they're going to work with children. And, this is something we need to do 3 years before, like at the Red Cross, we prepare for disaster cycles 3 years in advance. We need to bring that mindset to our policymakers and our national level interventions, as all the speakers have pointed to. But HeartMath interventions address these 4 barriers because they're neutral facilitators. You saw in a photograph of Jeff's, I don't think he mentioned this, children practicing the intervention you learned today before reading the Quran. So these interventions facilitate the heart connection neurologically that children and adults have with themselves and their culture. So they're neutral facilitators of whatever culture they're used in. They can be done at low to no cost. As Margaret put in the chat, children can teach each other. And so in that low to no cost, we override the financial barriers and financial priorities of national budget systems. These interventions have a way to override many of the barriers to adequately preparing and inadequately being prepared, recover from, and adapt to our emergencies.
Thank you so much, Shiva. I know Benti has her hand up, and I'm hoping that we can hear from Emmanuel again. So Benti, you've had your hand up. Would you like to comment? Thank you, Shiva.
Just a very quick one, and regarding teachers, and thank you, Shiva, for mentioning teachers and the percentage you are saying how important they are, and what role they are playing in our children's life. Someone said at some point that, Bente, you always say that education is the most powerful and important we do. But think about, I'm studying at the university and blah, 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 and that is very important. But it's the starting point of the child. To have educated teachers from day one, we send children into school. Teachers learn to read to learn. That is number one for me. And if we don't have educated teachers, the word will disappear. I don't know what happened. I'm a little bit naive saying this now, but it's so important to educate the teachers and really to fight for teachers' role in the world. Yeah, I stop there.
Yes, I'd like to add something. An important barrier will be the financial crisis coming. And for instance, in Europe, the ICRC, so the Red Cross, cuts budgets. And I know that some of my clients, because I'm a partner of the Red Cross in France, some of my clients working for the Red Cross are very worried about the cuts in budgets, and maybe many of them won't be able to work for the Red Cross next year. And the second point is that very often the states don't spend much on mental health. In France, for instance, it is the case, you know, and I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but I'm quite sure it is. What is your opinion about that, or your knowledge about the financing of mental health by states? No answer.
I could quickly say that here in the United States, we're in not just a crisis of financing mental health, but actually a crisis of mental health provider access. The Surgeon General here identified that by the end of 2024, we will have a reduction in frontline mental health care workers by up to 2/3 because of burnout since COVID. And commensurate with that, a demand for mental health care services that has increased by 40% since COVID. So we are in a crisis of demand without providers to provide for it. We actually have policies that require mental health care providers to have an additional visit with a client who's at risk within 10 days of the first visit. Our Kaiser mental health providers don't have enough appointments in their calendar to be compliant with that policy. And so again, this gets to how do we teach populations to be their own mental health care providers? Through self-regulation and self-soothing techniques, because we don't have enough trained professionals to meet the current need. The need is growing, the available professionals are reducing. And I want to speak also just really briefly to the gentleman in the chat who keeps talking about free education and ubiquitous access, which is so crucial and something that my own grandfather fought for worldwide, for free education. And so I want to acknowledge an Indian citizen, some of you may know of, Sugata Mitra, who won the TED Prize many years ago for his school in the cloud. And it's another reason I advocate for these self-soothing, self-regulating techniques like heart math, which allow children of all ages to access the primary resource, which is the resource to their own inner wisdom and their own capacity to seek meeting their needs. Sugata Mitra discovered that by putting, I believe it was in Calcutta, but I can't remember the exact city, by putting computers available on the streets in the ghetto, children taught themselves how to use them and how to learn. And so children as young as 7 to 9 years old were teaching themselves about recombinant DNA in English on the streets of India without a teacher present, with following their own inner heart's guidance and Google. So we can make education ubiquitous by giving people access to their own inner wisdom and their capacity to follow their curiosity and their innate desire to learn and contribute.
Thank you, Shiva. I just wondered if perhaps Mintu and Jeff, whether you would have sort of any sort of concluding comments to the sort of discussions that have happened this evening. In fact, every speaker can have another minute or so if they'd like to make a concluding comment. Should we start with you, Jeff?
Yeah, yes, thank you. As someone who actually works with thousands of schools and youth agencies around the United States, Canada, Mexico, and increasingly international, I am actually remarkably hopeful, despite a lot of crises, because I'm seeing this openness that was not existent 10 or 20 years ago, where there's this wellness or wholeness capacity that educators more and more and policymakers are considering, even though there are shortfalls and there's crises on every level. But I am heartened by the momentum I'm seeing, because I could see our outreach growing tremendously. Again, not being head in the sand with the crises that are going on, and that's why we're meeting here, to try to advance more education and more neuroscience into organizational policies. But I just wanted to add that note that I am, just the fact that we're having this discussion right now is very meaningful. So I am actually hopeful about the future in surprising ways.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. Mintu, can we move on to you? Thank you.
Thank you. I think, it is most important that, education emergency is discussing across this platform. So it shows that it's a priority. It's a priority for all at all level. The ministry and the other allied department, everybody should come together. My last focus is the teacher. We often talk about the children. We often think about them, but what about the teacher in also their safety and teacher capacity building, because they are going to be, they can be the life-saving teaching methodology to the children. So I think that is another. So investment on teacher also is one of the important to bring the education emergency as a practice. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mintu. As a teacher, I've had to remain calm in crisis situations and, still worrying about my own family, but you can't even think about that. You've just got to be staying calm for those children that are in your classroom, in your care. And that's something that, teachers have to do naturally, but it would be good for them to get support to be able to keep their children safe. Yeah. Shiva, would you like to add anything else?
For me personally, the biggest barrier to achieving these things aren't the solutions. I feel like we're actually discussing the adequate solutions here today. It's marrying the solutions at the grassroots with the policymakers and infrastructure that can implement them at scale. And this is why I am so honored and thrilled and grateful to Amma and to the C20, because this C20 is bringing the grassroots solutions together with the policymakers at an unprecedented level. And this is truly a dream come true. And to continue the conversation so that we can marry more grassroots solutions with high-level policy. I put our email in the chat and would love to continue this inquiry in a think tank. So please reach out to us at support@heartambassadors.com if you'd like to be a part of the continued dialogue.
Thank you, Shiva. That's very inspiring for all of us, as is the work that you're doing, because it's been very far-reaching, and it's incredible when a few individuals can make such a big difference. Thank you. Bente.
Yes, I would like to say as a last important thing that from my heart, it is to all authorities, look at the standards you have developed in the education system and see if you are able to really have the right standard for your right situation. If not, seek advice where you can find a standard that can help you to respond to the situation you are in. We are here to support. You develop always the best standards for your education system, but if you need any support to do that, do it. INE are developing new minimum standards, and education in emergency is not a quick fix. It is education development put in a different situation. And it's about physical. If a child is experiencing that the school is falling apart, they will not go back to that school. If they are traumatized because of that experience, they will not go back to the school. And children in different ages experience trauma differently. That's why education in emergency is focusing on physical, psychological, and cognitive development. Look for good standards so you can cover those three issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Bente, and also for the tip for everyone here to consider joining the INEE as well. Yeah, thank you. Linda.
Thank you again for this really enlightening discussion and your commitment to sustainable changes. I think a couple of points. I think about there's a Red Cross program called the Pillowcase Project, and it teaches children in the US mainly about fire safety and what other disaster might affect them, hurricanes on the East Coast, tornadoes in the Midwest. But what they're taught are coping skills, and they go home and they educate their families. And this program is also used internationally, and it's that bottom up. But to everybody's point, we also need to work with the community. I think for children, often environments, people think about physical and emotional health. And I just think also the environment. If they see repeated images of the disaster, that increases trauma. So remembering it's physical, emotional, and the environment, or as Bente said, the community, what is happening and what maintaining those schedules, very important. I think as we also, mentioned the challenge for mental health professionals. I think the Red Cross relies, at least in the US, 90% of our workforce are volunteers. It's more complex to support a team of volunteers, but truly, truly beautiful. And it also has a benefit to the volunteer. So volunteerism actually helps support well-being. And so just remembering that as we're doing all of these things together, we've got amazing resources through HeartMath, brilliant policy suggestions, but remembering that it all comes together. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Linda, and for all the work you're doing, and all the volunteers that are supporting the Red Cross as well. Thank you. Emmanuel, would you like to conclude?
Again, thank you to everyone. I think one of our main quality here is our openness, and definitely we have to work together and to provide different tools to every children and to every people in charge with children. And I would add something really interesting. I think that it is in Norway or Sweden or Denmark, they have implemented teachings in empathy at school. And I think that this is deeply important and the root of compassion being a focus of Amma, and she really insists in developing compassions and in schools. And I think that every tools we use here in order to help them regulate their emotion are a way to be as well more compassionate towards others. And I will thank you again for all this wonderful work you've done and all your organization of this working group. Thank you again.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And finishing on the note of compassion, which is after all, one of the main key messages from Amma for us all. So while you've been talking, we've actually taken a group picture to capture everybody. So thank you so much for everything. I'd like to thank all the participants who attended the virtual seminar. We sincerely thank you for taking time to attend the event. I know that this has been recorded, so it's also going to be available on YouTube as well, so that you can share it for people who weren't able to attend, because I think it's very significant. At this crucial juncture, we have an incredible opportunity to collaborate in order to find solutions to the world's problems. I think we've all agreed on that this evening, that this is such a wonderful opportunity. So we really look forward to your active participation in all of the upcoming events. If any of you would like to come on May 20th and 21st, we're having a conference in Kerala, in Trivandrum. So please reach out to us if you'd like to come and attend the speakers. If you, in particular, if you would like to come, let us know. I think maybe some of you are already in India at the moment, so you might be here for that as well. So we look forward to your active participation in all the upcoming events, which all of this work is really going to aid in the development of evidence-based, action-oriented policy discussions and outcomes. So thank you so much again, everyone, for your participation, speakers and the audience. And I wish you all a very good day, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. And Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to all. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.